Good afternoon. Hi, everyone. My name is Casey Oakes. My pronouns are he, him, and I am Director of Global Supplier Diversity for Merit International. I am so excited to be here with you today, leading this session on supplier diversity in government at the New World 2021 LGBT Global Summit. I want to thank the Canadian LGBT Chamber of Commerce for having me and assembling this esteemed panel of leaders in the public sector to join me. So I want to bring on screen and join Mike Paschallock, Bill McAvoy, and Kurt Topper for this conversation. We're going to have by procurement and supplier diversity practitioners for procurement and supplier diversity practitioners. We're going to get in the weeds today about how and why to do this work. So with that, I do want to turn it over to my panelists and allow them to introduce themselves. So Mike, why don't we start with you?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me here at New Summit. Excellent to be here. My name is Mike Paschallock. I'm the Chief Procurement Officer for the City of Toronto. The City of Toronto, we procure approximately $2.5 billion worth of goods and services each year, primarily in the construction industry, but across all sectors because we have 44 different lines of businesses. So some days I talk about simple things like office supplies through to consulting, IT contracts, and then complex construction contracts. The City of Toronto is proud to be the first municipality in Canada to have a supplier diversity program, which we launched in 2016. And I've been happy to be the champion since I've been in this role since 2012. So that's why I'm happy to talk today and happy to talk with Bill and Kurt about supplier diversity.
Thanks so much, Mike. Bill, do you want to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Casey. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bill McAvoy, and I serve as the Executive Director of the Supplier Diversity Office for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. We certify or have partnerships with organizations that certify minority, women, veteran, LGBT, persons with disability, and service disabled veterans, and those folks are all included in our supplier diversity program. We became actually the newest state agency in state government approximately 5 months ago. While our office has existed for approximately 40 years, we actually became an independent agency, and we're very proud of that, and also proud to give notice that our initiatives that were kicked off approximately 5.5 years ago to include LGBT businesses in our supplier diversity program, which were done executive order, were actually included in the statute that made us an independent agency. So now our initiatives to include LGBT, disability, and veteran, as well as minority and women businesses, is included in our statute. So happy to be here today and looking forward to this discussion.
Thanks so much. And Kurt.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kurt Topper. I'm the Secretary of General Services for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So I serve in a role that's a bit like Bill's, but for Pennsylvania. Among other things, my agency oversees the supplier diversity program for the Commonwealth. Commonwealth of Pennsylvania spends upwards of $5 billion a year on goods and services. And one of my responsibilities is making sure that we spend as much of that money as possible with small and diverse suppliers here in Pennsylvania. I was proud that Pennsylvania was the second state after Massachusetts, after Bill, to formally recognize and include LGBT plus businesses in our own program. Our program dates back probably 30 plus years. But it has largely been executed based on executive order and based on the governor's leadership. So it depended significantly who was in the governor's office. And I'm very proud to work for Governor Wolf, who on the first day made it clear that his priority for me as an agency head was going to be to make sure that we made progress on this front. And we have very nearly tripled the amount of business that we're doing with small, diverse businesses over the last 6 years. So we're making progress. Happy to be here.
Thank you for being here. That's fantastic. This panel is so incredibly just accomplished, and I want to congratulate you all on the work that you've already done, and I'm looking forward to learning from you all. I think our audience will find that just like at every corporation, each state agency or provincial agency or governmental agency, supplier diversity and supply chains can look a little bit different. So I think this group here will do a really great job of helping us conceptualize what supplier diversity in government can look like. I want to encourage all of our attendees to use the chat feature pretty heavily, connect with each other in there. I hope there's a robust discussion. And then if you do have questions for the panel, I do have a little bit of time set aside at the end. So please feel free to pop those questions into the chat, and we'll do our best to grab them and tee them up for our panelists as time allows. So with that, I do want to dive into some of our questions. Mike, my first question is for you. I've got you're our Canadian representative on the panel today, so I have to defer and start with you. So the City of Toronto was the first municipality to implement a social procurement program. A lot of the folks on the call might only understand supplier diversity from what they've seen from large corporations like my own. So can you tell me a little bit about Toronto's program and what lessons were learned from implementing it as the first here in Canada?
Thanks, happy to, Casey. So the city's social procurement program, it started in 2016 and actually has two components to it. One of which is our supply chain diversity program, and then we also have something we call workforce development. So on our supply chain diversity, much like what Bill and Kurt are doing, we require when we go out for bids up to $100,000 to get one quote, at least one quote from a certified diverse supplier. So that includes LGBTQ plus, women, minority, and people with disabilities, and we're using the certification programs such as CGLCC has to know which suppliers to contact. So we require our staff to contact at least one up to $100,000 to get those small and medium-sized diverse businesses access to the procurement process with the city, and ultimately getting some contracts. Above $100,000, what we do is when we have a request for proposal or some sort of pre-qualification, we'll build in scoring that would allow a certified diverse supplier to get extra points for that. And also if they have their own supply chain diversity program, they'll also get points for that. So it can give some vendors an edge in that process. On the workforce development side, it's very similar, except our focus is on actually using the contracts we have in play to hire people from equity-seeking groups. So we will either direct a contractor to build in a training program or to hire in a professional administration capacity, or even use an apprenticeship program if that's applicable, to hire equity-seeking people. Or as an alternative, they could also use subcontractors where they're using certified diverse suppliers. So we try to build that in as a way to build out using our contracts as a way to get community benefits on the ground. So we've been doing it since 2016, first municipality to do it. There is no provincial legislation or federal legislation asking us to do supply chain diversity. So it's definitely been a learning process. Being first is a challenge because you're first. So we've been building things out. One of the big things that we learned is all around data and how we set it up so that we're collecting the right data and tracking it. So right now we don't have any targets for certified diverse suppliers because we were trying to educate everyone that we're doing it and building awareness. And we knew that if we tried to set a target right off the bat, it wouldn't work for us very well. So one of the things we've been learning though is we need to keep educating bidders or vendors that they should go certify, that it's actually of value to do so. And on the other side, I've been heavily involved in educating my municipal colleagues in other municipalities and the provincial government and federal government that they too should set up a program, because there is definite value in making sure that we are getting diverse suppliers into our supply chain. And finally, in terms of another lesson learned is we always have to remind our staff, it's very easy to kind of revert back and invite the vendors that you really shouldn't do that. You should really be reaching out, inviting those diverse suppliers, and if there's an issue, let us know, because we'll find out maybe that diverse supplier isn't the right fit for us, but maybe we're just not asking the right questions. So we want to make sure the staff do it and actually tell us, and so we can learn from it. So we've definitely learned a lot. I think the other thing I would just say in terms of data lessons learned is that we also need to work with the certifying diversity groups like CGLCC to help segment the data a little bit better so that we can understand where diverse suppliers might intersect multiple diversity situations. So, right now we've been asked to look at Black business community and Indigenous business community and bring more of them into the fold. But we'd like to understand they might cross a number of different diversity groups, but they might only be certified in one. So but we still want to know who they are. So it's in Canada, I think the biggest issue is understanding who's out there and building that data. And that's what we're going to be working on moving into the future.
Mike, you're singing my song. I think you'll find too, whether you're in a government institution or a corporation, supplier diversity data is a challenge that a lot of people are trying to solve, and it's a journey for a lot of us. I do want to ask kind of just one quick follow-up. Being the first in Canada, kind of what were those early conversations like, and why was it important for Toronto and the people who made that decision to take that leap without the provincial or federal legislation out there?
Sure. So we benefited from the fact that in 2015 we were hosting the PanAm and PanAm Games in Toronto, and they had set up a diversity program as part of their supply chain. And the City Council wanted to ensure that good program didn't disappear once the games were over. So they actually directed staff to find a way to build that into our procurement process. So that's, I started in 2012, the games were in 2015. So 2014, that was what I was trying to figure out with a good cross team in the city. And we talked with a lot of vendors and about what we were looking for and helped develop the program based on that. But it was just we realized that the city being so diverse to have our supply chain start moving to represent the constituencies of the city. So that's the driving force behind that.
Great. Now I should move our next question to Bill. Chronologically, Massachusetts beat Pennsylvania to the punch here, but I'm an old Philly boy. I lived in Pennsylvania for a little bit. So I'm going to direct our next question to Kurt and then and save Bill for last of this first round. So Kurt, we have a number of public institutions, crown corporations, industries, and just levels of government represented, even just individual departments on the call today, who might not have an example of supplier diversity that they can point to at their level or in their government body. So how can supplier diversity be brought into those organizations, and how can they be implemented in those sectors?
Thanks, Casey. After meeting Mike and hearing Mike's story, I was I really took a second to think about this question and to think about what I could add, given that in Pennsylvania and in most states or many states in the U.S., we've had 30 plus years of some federal programming around construction dollars, and we've had abundant case law and a hodgepodge of programs across federal, state, and municipal governments here going back, almost as long as the best private sector firms have been doing this work. So I tried to take a step back and just think about, if I were starting from scratch, what would I do? And I'll just share a couple of ideas. The first is this: start at the top if you can. having the buy-in and the sponsorship that you need from the executive leadership, from the political leadership, is really, really important. You're going to have to engage with the political leaders one way or the other at some point. And so I think it's really critical if it's possible. I'm not saying it's a showstopper, but if it's possible, you really do want to get the executives to buy in, because you're gonna need them to provide some air cover. I think a second idea here is that, and we've learned this along the way, to the extent you're going to use a certification body in order to, and I recommend that you do, you want to outsource the certification process. You want to use groups like this Chamber of Commerce, like, Pennsylvania actually works with 5 different private certification bodies in order to do the certification work. We used to do the certification on our own, and many public sector organizations have done that historically. And what it leads to is a mix and match of criteria from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, and I think it makes it harder for the suppliers that we're trying to attract. So I would encourage anybody who's getting started from scratch to actually use third-party certification bodies in order to do this, in order to do the certification work, as opposed to trying to do it yourself. I think I think you got to go out of your way to make the case that supplier diversity is essential for reasons other than the fact that it's just the right thing to do. So as it turns out, it's better for your business. To the extent that we have a more diverse supply chain, we have a more innovative supply chain. It's not automatic. You'll be working with stakeholders who have a set of mistaken assumptions about supplier diversity, and you want to deal with those head on. At one time early on, we developed a list of myths, and then counter arguments to those myths about supplier diversity. As it turns out, your costs do not automatically go up because you've started working with small, diverse firms. We have managed, at the same time that we have tripled the amount of business we're doing with small, diverse businesses in PA, we have also pulled about $400 million out of our supply chain in savings over that same period. So it's quite possible to do both. You can get more efficient and do the right thing in terms of how you deliver your programs. You want to make it data-driven. The best thing we've done in the last few years, or one of the best things, was fund and execute a disparity study in Pennsylvania, which effectively removed a lot of the political arguments about this program, right? It made it clear empirically that during the period of the study, all things being equal, we ought to have been doing about 24% of our business with small, diverse firms. But in reality, during that period, we were doing about 5% of our business with those firms. And once I had that study, I had a burning platform that I could use I had something I could, I had a stake I could put in the ground and go talk to stakeholders about the fact that we were falling way behind. It helped for me to look to benchmarks like Massachusetts and Maryland and New York, and talk about their examples. So don't reinvent the wheel, right? And then, last, and this is, I think, really, really important, is to the extent possible, you want to integrate the program with your procurement effort, right? So you've already got a team that's doing supply chain and contracting. They're probably wearing 17 different hats at once. They're probably already overworked. And if you show up basically saying, hey, I want you to consider this whole other set of criteria in addition to price and the contractor's ability to do the job, that's a tough sell when folks are that busy. And I think what you want to do is engage your procurement folks early. And to the extent you're able, make diversity goals a key part of your procurement team's goals. It should be a shared effort. if it's a throw the thing over the, if it's a, throw the scoring over the wall to the DISBO team to have the DISBO team figure it out and then have them send it back, you're going to create a scenario where you potentially have internal conflict that's going to hold your program back. So engage all those stakeholders early on, and make diversity in your contracting part of your procurement team's remit.
Kurt, there's so many nuggets of wisdom in there. I can feel in the chat there are questions about this disparity study already. So just real quick before we move on, can you talk a little bit, did you hire an external vendor to do that study? Was that an internal analytics team? How did you go about kind of generating that data, which was instrumental in making the case internally that you could be doing more as a state?
So we hired a third party a firm to do the disparity study in Pennsylvania. Disparity studies are a key part of how states comply with federal regulations for the expenditure of their federal highway funds with their diversity programs. So there's a small group of suppliers who have built sort of a niche market, and they're very good at delivering disparity studies that meet the legal requirements in the U.S. And that can help your program pass muster. And we did it largely because we wanted the legal framework to make the program more defensible. But the truth is that the value of the study went so much more beyond that. The value of the study was immense because it gave me empirical data that I could point to that could say, look, it's no one's fault. No one here there's no individual person who is biased that's causing these problems necessarily. Our problem is systemic. Mm-hmm. And the study really helped us make that case. But we can put you in touch with firms that can do this work.
That's great. And then there was Massachusetts. So Bill, I worked at the National LGBT Chamber of Commerce in the United States when Massachusetts made this historic step of becoming the first state to recognize the LGBT certification in its procurement practices. And I can tell you there's this perception that the US is very far ahead of others on supplier diversity, but historically in the States, supplier diversity from a governmental level until Massachusetts was primarily focused exclusively on minority and women, and to a smaller extent veterans, and then came Massachusetts with this historic step. So can you talk to me about how taking a bold step like this for Massachusetts helped achieve some of the goals that your state had for procurement, and if there were other unintended or ancillary benefits along economic development or other goals the state may have had or metrics it saw?
Absolutely, thank you. Yeah, we were very proud of the announcement where we had the NGLCC as part of that announcement with Governor Baker in November 2015 to become the first state in the U.S. To include LGBT businesses as well as veteran and persons with disability that were not part of our program prior to that date. And this Governor Baker did that via an executive order, and he expanded upon our 25-plus-year-old supplier diversity program to now include those 3 additional categories. At that time, we also executed a 20-year memorandum of understanding with NGLCC for them to certify LGBTs on our behalf. So we're very proud of our relationship and long working friendship we have with NGLCC, and recommend for all folks to work very closely with Canadian as well as US NGLCC to partner with them as you build your programs. As you mentioned the word bold step, well, this may have appeared to be a bold step. It really was just a common sense step. Because LGBT businesses, as well as the other business categories, minority, women, veteran, and persons with disability, they are represented in, underrepresented in state contracting, and therefore, there is a disparity in terms of their use versus their availability within the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. They also represent our constituents in our society and are valuable contributors to our society, to our economy as well, and also to the business community. And therefore, we felt they should be provided with greater opportunities to participate in our programs. It also, another rationale for doing this was that it followed the best-in-class corporate model. We did actually a review of many best-in-class programs at the corporate level, and certainly folks sometimes lead the way in corporations, and certainly don't have some of the restrictions that that Mike and Kurt and us have in the public sector, in terms of being able to do certain things. So we looked at the best corporate models and found that there was additional inclusion beyond minority and women businesses. So our goal as a state is to ensure diversity, equity, and inclusion at all levels of government, including people diversity in terms of HR who are hiring, folks that are on government boards, representing, the government, as well as supplier diversity. And by being more inclusive, it helps to promote economic development, as you asked, by ensuring, that everyone has an opportunity to participate in the economy and in the government that represents them, and by making sure that that government is representative of them and reflects them and mirrors, our citizens. As I mentioned at the beginning, our office was recently elevated to an independent oversight agency. We were previously in the procurement office, and prior to that, we were in the economic development office. So there's always been that question about whether supplier diversity is a procurement tool or is it an economic development tool. I always respond that it is in fact both, and we try to play that role to both help with the economy as well as helping the procurement process for these businesses. As I mentioned earlier, the legislation that elevated our office also formally added LGBT, veteran, and disability-owned businesses into our supplier diversity program. So the big news from us is that Massachusetts, and for LGBTs, is that we now include LGBTs in our statute as well as the executive order that initially created the supplier diversity program.
That's fantastic. And I'm sure with all these new resources and structures, there's new challenges, but new opportunities as well. In kind of formulating the new office, once it was signed into law, kind of what new opportunity do you see really on the horizon for the program in the state?
So first of all, this gave us a higher level of authority and autonomy within government. So previously, we're kind of perceived as being part of the procurement office, which was great. But now being independent, we're actually able to establish ourselves and our oversight authority and autonomy again with agencies. So one of the initial things that I did was actually to meet with all the secretaries, such as folks in Kurt's level, throughout government, to make sure that we have support from the top. The governor actually directed us to do that, to meet and to make sure that we have level support at all levels of government. And then what we're also doing is we're asking all of our secretariats and agencies to submit to us procurement plans. So previously, we just were more reactive in terms of, procurement would evolve and would be posted for the public, anyone in the public to bid on, and we would hear from some of our diverse businesses. What we're trying to do with this effort is to be more intentional, looking out 3 months, 6 months, a year, so we can help our diverse businesses to find any resources they may need, whether it be training, whether it be access to capital, or other types of technical assistance that they may need in order to be able to put together a good bid package to be able to respond to that. So that's one of the things we're really focusing on, is to be more intentional. Part of that is we have 3,800 diverse businesses that are certified by the state of Mass or by, again, LGLCC and some of our other partners. For those 3,800 businesses, they're not all going to get public contracts with the state. And many of them, when we're renewing their certification, will say, we're not sure if we want to renew. So what we're doing is we're trying to expand upon the opportunities that we make available to them. So we've developed actually a municipal supplier diversity playbook, and we're actually marketing that to our cities and towns throughout the Commonwealth to get them to hopefully buy into developing supplier diversity at the municipal level, with their own governments, such as what Mike was very brave to do, and, is the first in Canada, and we're hoping to get others in Massachusetts. Boston has a program, for example, in Massachusetts, but we're trying to get some of the other cities and towns to do that as well. And we're finding that given the focus in our society, in our world of diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's an easy sell, which is great. And we're telling folks at the beginning, don't feel like you have to have an entirely developed program. We just ask folks to initially focus on getting, again, as Kurt and Mike were saying, getting support from the top, and then perhaps making some purchases, targeting some purchases, trying to get some of your current businesses you're doing business with to become certified is another easy low-hanging fruit way to, if they fall under the categories of certainly for being certified. So again, we're marketing that tool out to our cities and towns as one of our first efforts.
That tool sounds amazing. I'm going to build off of that tool and send a question to Mike along those lines, building off of Kurt's myth busting document as well. So Mike, I want you to imagine we're at a Marriott property in Toronto in the lobby. One of the CGLCC staff members are giving you 2 drink tickets and you're enjoying a glass of Canadian LGBT-owned wine. And someone comes up to you and says, supplier diversity, isn't that something that happens in the States? Isn't that something for corporations? Give me your 30 to 60 second kind of pitch on why someone should implement supplier diversity in their government agency here in Canada.
Sure. I think one of the leading things I would say is it's, to Bill's point of being an economic development tool, we actually have characterized our program as our poverty reduction, one of our poverty reduction strategies. And the city has a 20-year poverty reduction strategy. We're a platform of that, because the simple theory is if we can get more business out to certified diverse suppliers, they will then grow and hire from their diverse community, which will then help reduce the fact that people don't have work. And if we can help get people into jobs, that will then help reduce poverty. And that is one of the reasons why government, really should focus on building a supplier diversity program. That alone will help dramatically across the board of what a municipal and provincial government would be dealing with, in particular municipalities. Without even talking about the excellence you can get from innovative supply chains and having just diversity in that supply chain.
Casey, we can't hear you.
Sorry about that. I have a mute button on my laptop that I like to use and forget about. We do have a question in the chat for Kurt and Bill, just interested from the Global Affairs from Canada. Do your government entities accept any Canadian certifications, diversity certifications, or are your programs primarily focused on US-based diversity certifications and kind of this Buy American or Buy Pennsylvania, Massachusetts initiatives?
Do you want to go first, Bill, or shall I?
Sure. Yeah, if you'd like to, go ahead.
Well, you're closer to the Canadian border.
Okay. I'll go first. So we actually accept certifications as a basis for us certifying. So if, for example, someone is certified in the state of Pennsylvania, we ask for them, for the business, when they're coming into Massachusetts, to provide a copy of their certification from Pennsylvania, copy of their site visit, and then we conduct a full certification. But what we're looking to do actually is to try to replicate what we have with NGLCC, with the National Minority Supplier Development Council, with WeBank, which is a women's certification organization in the Commonwealth, in the United States. We're trying to replicate that with other states. So we would look, for example, to hopefully partner with Pennsylvania, that we could either recognize or at least have an abbreviated process for recognition of that. So we're starting to do that now. And as an independent agency, we're going to be getting more money as an agency effective July 1st to be able to hire more people to do things. So we would certainly be open to any Canadian companies companies that are certified in Canada as well. And again, as long as the certification meets the gold standard of ownership, control, independence, and ongoing. Those are the requirements, at least 51% owned. As long as it follows those standards, we then have done what we've done with these other national organizations in the United States, is to make sure that our certifications are aligned. And then we could potentially talk about whether we accept them on their face or whether we have an abbreviated process that we could execute through an MOU of some sort between us and the certifying entity.
So in Pennsylvania, we are working with the same certification entities that Bill is in Massachusetts. We're working with WeBank and the NMSDC and the chamber, and I think there are 5 total, and I can't name them all off the top of my head. Roughly 20% of the suppliers in our SDB database, small diverse supplier database, roughly 20% are from outside of Pennsylvania. They tend to be in surrounding states. I don't know off the top of my head if any of them are international or are in Canada. That's a good question. I think our position would be, if you're certified via one of those certifying bodies, our job is to verify that certification. And if you, once we've verified that certification, and if you meet the additional criteria that the state has, so specifically that we have some revenue limits. You've got to have total revenue under $38.5 million, and you've got to have fewer than 100 employees. Once we've validated those things, then I imagine Canadian or no, we would invite you into our database. We'd be happy to.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I think the broad answer to that question is that some states do, and some states may have legislation or restrictions trying to get them to buy specifically from within their state. But 2 things that I would offer, and then it looks like Kerr has something to say as well, is just one, concurrently happening right now, CGLCC is running 2 sessions, one teaching Canadian-owned businesses or helping them explore the American market, and then also one teaching American and internationally based businesses how to enter the Canadian market. And then 2, even if a state's program isn't necessarily inclusive of a Canadian diversity certification at the prime level, their encouragement of diversity likely opens up doors at the tier 2 level as well to be working with their primes, and their prime suppliers might find value in your CGLCC or CAMZ or We Connect International certification. Kurt,
yeah.
Do you want to add?
Thanks, Casey. Just 2 thoughts. One, we would like nothing better than prime contractors to work with small diverse suppliers as subs, and those small diverse suppliers, and we'd love for them to pull them from our database and work with them. And as long as you're in my database, it counts. No matter where you're actually headquartered. And then 2, oddly enough, we have some reciprocity rules between our states that make it really difficult. Like, we don't have a preference for Pennsylvania businesses within Pennsylvania procurement. And the logic there is that if we erected those kinds of preferences in PA, then Pennsylvania-based companies would be at a disadvantage when they went to try to sell business into other states, because those other states would then erect their own preferences. And so Pennsylvania has taken the position that we don't have preferences for internal companies.
That's great. We're almost out of time. I do have one more question from the audience. I'm gonna tee it up to whoever has the best response and raises their hand, just because we're almost out of time. But particularly for public sector entities, and more technical areas, water, utilities, power grids. Does anyone have any quick, good advice on how to get diverse-owned companies to respond to RFPs and attract more diverse-owned companies into your RFP process? Looks like I see Bill coming off mute, so I'm going to tee it up to Bill from Massachusetts.
Thanks, Casey. So what we're trying to do, as I mentioned earlier, we're trying to be more intentional in our efforts. We have a procurement system, as all states do, and most public entities use some type of procurement platform for posting your solicitations. And those actually provide notice to anyone that subscribes to those systems. So there's a requirement in public procurement that it be open, fair, and competitive. So while our procurement system posts notice to everyone, whether you're diverse or non-diverse, we take an additional effort, our Supplier Diversity Office, to push messages out to our diverse businesses in addition to them getting that public message. So we're actually trying to do more hand-holding with them. So I think it's important. Sometimes you may need to do some nurturing if you find some folks that could potentially be bidding on opportunities, that you don't just rely on, again, the public posting process of the bid, that you actually do some additional messaging to the diverse businesses and ask them if they have a need for resources, whether it be training or whether they need to be connected to folks that can help them fill out the bid, not our office, but other places that could help them fill out the bid, or to access to capital, or access to be able to purchase a new van to deliver things, or whatever it could be. It's important to make sure you're not just doing the one-stop message, but you're doing additional pushes out to them and being more intentional so that they'll hopefully respond to the bids.
That's great. Well, I want to close out, just thank Mike, Bill, and Kurt for your leadership, your brilliant ideas. I also want to acknowledge the City of Toronto, the state of Pennsylvania, the state of Massachusetts for really stepping up and being leaders in this space. One of my thoughts on that last question as well is a lot of diverse-owned companies don't know that you want to do business with them. And that LGBT suppliers are welcome in your supply chain unless you're really public and bold about it. And so when you see big, bold announcements, and even if it seems not bold to you, but it can seem bold to an LGBT supplier from a government entity like Toronto, like Pennsylvania, like Massachusetts, it does do more to get those folks certified, to get them to out themselves in the supply chain and really start strategizing their business model to be able to do business with your entity. So I want to thank these government leaders and these government agencies for the work they're doing on this journey. I also want to thank CGLCC for convening us here today. I believe from here, you all have a very quick break, but we'll be back in about 15 minutes for a couple more breakout sessions in various tracks. So please stay engaged with this conference. There's a lot of great content throughout the rest of the conference, and make sure you're engaging. So thanks again, and happy Pride, everyone.